Hello, friends, and welcome to Mousterpiece Melodies, a podcast that's listening to the songs of Disney movies, past and present. I'm Josh Spiegel.
And I'm Scott Renshaw. Thanks for joining us on this comprehensive and encyclopedic compendium of all things Disney music. Now playing, from 1973, Robin Hood.
Before we get into our discussion, thank you for listening. No matter how you're checking the show out, we hope you like what you're hearing, and if you are, we'd appreciate it if you could rate and review Mousterpiece Melodies on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever app you're using to listen.
That's right. Let everyone know how much you love the show and tell your friends to do the same. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Scott Renshaw, and you can read my film criticism at Salt Lake City Weekly at cityweekly.net.
And you can follow me on Blue Sky at Mousterpiece and email me at mousterpiececinema@gmail.com with any comments, questions, or opinions you'd like to share. All right, now that all the housekeeping is out of the way, let's start talking about the songs of Robin Hood. And to do that, we're thrilled to bring into the show a very special guest. He is a film critic for Washington City Paper, Alan Zilberman. Welcome to Mousterpiece Melodies. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Josh and Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are delighted to have you to talk about the songs of Robin Hood. As Scott mentioned, this is the 1973 film from Walt Disney Animation Studios, featuring the voices of Peter Ustinov, Terry Thomas, Monica Evans, Brian Bedford, and a couple of people who actually sing songs in this movie. That's a hint as to one of the interesting aspects of the music of Robin Hood. Now, I always forget, Alan, I know you and I are very close to the same age. I forget if you and I were born the same year or right around.
Yeah, we were both born in 1984.
That's right. Alan has not been stalking me. We are friends offline, in case anybody's wondering why Alan was so quickly able to identify my birth year. But that being said, now, Scott, obviously, of the three of us, you are the elder statesman, and longtime listeners know you've referenced it a couple of times in our episodes so far. This was the first film you remember seeing in theaters. Am I correct?
That is correct. Correct.
So, Scott, I kind of want to start with you because although we have just answered the question, when did you first hear of the film Robin Hood? What was your memory of that first time viewing it? Was it the kind of thing where it just unlocked a whole new world, different movie and song, for you? I mean, what's your recollection of that experience?
Well, I think as with a lot of things that, happen at a certain age, that the stories that are associated with it become more of the memory than the memory itself. And it's perhaps not necessarily that I remember being in a theater seeing it, but that we subsequently, and I've referred to this before, this was one of the several albums versions. Now, those who may have been aware or around at the time in the 1970s, you would have a vinyl record that would have the entire movie, basically dialogue, songs, everything. I had the Aristocats, I had Robin Hood, we had 101 Dalmatians. And so I am as familiar with these songs as I am with any songs in the Disney canon because I listen to them over and over. And this is before VHS, before any kind of home video media. But I could tell you that the line reading of every, who they are they? I mean, I know when every line is coming and every bit because, it was just all there was the whole thing. So this is just, it is part of my DNA, this movie. And this is not saying I love it, but I am so connected to it and know it so well that anytime I actually watch it, it's weird because I didn't actually watch it that many times. I just listened to it that many times.
Now, Alan, you and I, as I said, as we've established, born 10 years after this film came out, actually, just a little over 10 years. What's your recollection of kind of your introduction to this film?
Sure. So when I was growing up around the ages of, 4 to 8, it was in heavy rotation on my VHS growing up. Like I had like Scott was talking about having the record. I had the white clamshell VHS tape and I would watch it over and over. And it was that one, Sword in the Stone, and Sleeping Beauty were my three favorites. I really liked the ones where there were like male heroes that got to, do good and and they were like, got to, vanquish a foe, although no one gets really vanquished here. I'll get to that in a second. But, he has a sword, he does stuff. And I just kind of remember it being a lot of fun, and sort of like what Scott was saying, like, I watched it again to refresh my memory for this podcast a couple of days ago, and I was just struck by how much of it is just sort of etched in my memory, even though I hadn't watched the movie in over 20 years. I could remember each line. I remember just a lot of the imagery. And so while I it's not my favorite, I still have fond memories of it, and the rewatch I found a lot more interesting than I expected.
Fair enough. And again, I don't know that I owned a copy of Robin Hood. I definitely remember those white clamshell VHS, holders, but I don't remember that I had one of my own. I know that I'd seen this movie a few times when I was a little boy who wanted to be a big boy, of course, but what I will say is this. I think it's interesting that the two of you are clearly both enjoy the movie to some extent, but you're also ever so slightly hedging about the quality of the film. Neither of you will be surprised to learn that I'm going to be direct and blunt, and this movie is a really fascinating choice for the show. And the reason why I put this in our first season, which we're actually coming nearly to the end of, in case listeners are curious, I chose this over a movie. It's funny, right before we started recording, Alan asked if we had done one on The Jungle Book, a film that I like a ton more than I like Robin Hood, a movie that I'm going to reference a few times in this episode. And if you know your animation history, you know why I'm going to reference it a few times in this episode. But the reason I wanted to choose this is that this movie, I don't like this movie. I really don't like this movie, except I like most of the songs in this movie. This is a very odd little situation of, at least for me, movie not really successful, I think. I would argue this is like the peak of the xerographic era within Disney animation. And in case you don't know what that means, I'm going to mansplain xerography to all of you out there.
I don't know what it means.
Get excited.
So I'm glad.
Alan, I am going to blow your mind here in a bit. I will, however, now, Scott, you know what I'm talking about, I believe.
Yes.
So Scott understands why I'm going to wait until we discuss one specific song in this movie to dive into that discussion, because it will be very applicable. Having said that, I think the 60s and 70s, some but not all the films, Alan, you just mentioned, have a laid back, very relaxed vibe. I think this movie is aiming for that from the start. One of the lines I wrote down in my notes, because it's even fresher in my mind than it is for either of you. I watched it earlier today. I'd forgotten about how Alan Adale, the rooster minstrel voiced by Roger Miller, who wrote and performed 3 of the 5 songs in this film, he says that he's a minstrel. He's going to tell it how it is, or was, or whatever, which feels like a really solid microcosmic explanation of this movie as a whole. It is what it was. Whatever. Who cares? And there's a kind of a vibe of a little too much relaxed as to the point of being lazy, in my opinion. But the songs, I do think, are a really fun, strong suit. One of the songs in this film is an Academy Award nominee for Best Original Song. It is a song that you may have heard even if you don't realize you've heard it, because it appeared in a completely different animated film that now is technically owned by the Walt Disney Company. Again, a film I'll actually specify later. It's an interesting movie to discuss. I think it's a fascinating movie to discuss, but not one that I actually enjoy very much. It's not quite as bad as the Aristocats. That's probably my least favorite of this era. And I'm a cat person. I have cats. I would argue, as I did on the old show, the cat-centric movies from the 9 Old Men era of Disney animation, and even leading up to Oliver and Company in 1989 or 88, are a couple of the worst movies they ever made, which is so odd to me. Anyway, I would argue that. I know not everybody would.
Josh, can I ask what's your favorite from this era?
Oh, I mean, The Jungle Book, I would say, is my favorite from the era. Because the xerographic era, for your awareness, Alan, again, we'll get more detail soon, I would say starts with 101 Dalmatians, which is 2 years after Sleeping Beauty, which is a brilliant film. And then I would say it goes until Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh and Rescuers in 1977. You have the very weird period in the early 80s with The Fox and the Hound and The Black Cauldron, but those don't really line up with any real era as much as these are movies we made, but let's not talk about them too much, especially The Black Cauldron. Anyway, so the thing that I was most struck by this time, before we dive into our track-by-track discussion of the aforementioned 5 songs, what I had forgotten, and Scott, you had that vinyl record. I don't know if having listened to it so many times, obviously it's just part of the movie. It wouldn't have surprised you to realize, as I did, for a movie with 5 songs, there's a very, very, very long stretch of this movie with absolutely no singing at all, to the point of, I think there's really just 2 extended musical sequences. The first 2 songs are in the first 5 minutes of this movie. And the final 3 songs, I'm not counting the very brief reprises, because there are extremely brief reprises near the end. The other 3 songs are in a 10 to 12 minute stretch near the hour point of this movie. So I guess the question I have for the 2 of you, what was your reaction to the sense of, wow, the songs are kind of bunched together very briefly, and other than that, the music is your typical underscore in any animated film?
I agree that the structure of it is a little bizarre, because like you said, at the beginning there's songs and then there's a long period without any. But I also think it kind of follows the form of the movie rather well. I know that, Josh, you were just kind of saying that this is a very relaxed kind of movie, and I would kind of put that in a slightly more positive light and say Robin Hood's a really good hangout movie. It's just like, oh yeah, here's the scene where this happens. Oh, here's the scene where this happens. And it just kind of has this pace where you can kind of jump in at any point and be like, oh yeah, I remember, because it has not a lot of structure. But one thing that I do think is actually interesting about the use of music in the movie, and I think we'll get into a little bit more, is how it mixes diegetic and non-diegetic sound. It's fairly sophisticated and kind of adds to the world of these animals that I found interesting. And not something I necessarily realized when I was watching it as a little one who just was obsessed with the cute animals. But that's all. What about you, Scott? What's your impression?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I thought of it as a musical. I certainly did not have a sense for musical conventions in the mid to late 70s when I was really listening to this as much as I did. But yeah, the idea that there's this huge chunk, and I think about that extended stretch that focuses on the bunny children, and that is like, oh, it's adorable when you're a kid. They're so cute and their voices are so cute. And I'm like, this is really, it lasts so much longer than I remember and so much longer than it needs to. And so you end up with these very distinct chunks. It's like, where's Robin Hood? And why isn't Robin Hood doing anything cool? And why are we just having the little kids doing little kid things? And so you do have that big area where there's no music going on, and then when the music, it's like, oh yeah, I enjoy the music, and I really wish there were more of it. And could you have not figured out a way to insert a song in to kind of bring a little energy to that stuff where the kids are visiting with Maid Marian and Lady Cluck?
Whenever Robin Hood is on screen, all the other characters should be saying, "Where's Robin Hood?"
Robin Hood.
Well, I watching the movie recently. To your point, Scott, made me think of Dazed and Confused, because it's all these different social strata hanging out in weird configurations, and it's kind of interesting to see how they all blend together. And like Dazed and Confused, Robin Hood has stretches of songs where songs are really important, and then just periods of just dialogue.
So who's the Slater of this bunch? Is that Little John? Is Little John the Slater? I don't even know.
Wouldn't he be the Wooderson? Wouldn't he be the McConaughey character?
Yeah.
I mean, again, this is where I'd say you're being very flattering to compare it to Dazed and Confused. And I see what you mean about it being being a hangout movie. And I think the word that kept coming up as I was rewatching it this time, also to Scott's point, episodic. This is and it's not, and that is, to be clear, again, Disney animation fans know, the episodic structure of a number of animated films from like the 40s through the 70s is very intentional. It is not an accident. So that is certainly, I'm not pointing that out to be like, why is this? Like, that's kind of what they did for a while in the films that they made. I think this time, though, especially with the bunny children, I remember it's one of those things where probably somewhere in the nether regions of my memory, I have that little, you know how sometimes like little bits of audio from a movie or TV show just kind of stick in your head no matter what. You might not even remember what it's from. The way the little bunny girl is laughing at the very end of that one bit where she's like, like the little sighing laugh at the end. That always stuck with me. I know
exactly what that is.
Right, exactly. Again, little bits of the movie really get their hooks in you, even if it's not, for me, a great film. And I should also note, this movie's legacy, even though Robin Hood has never been maybe the biggest obvious hit, it is a film that has a passionate fan base. One of the directors of Zootopia has acknowledged that Robin Hood was a big inspiration, as we can imagine. A movie like The Lion King seems very inspired by it in one specific sequence that we'll talk about soon. Hint, it might involve a song with the word love in it. I was going to say the other thing is, as I wrote about a couple years ago at Polygon, this movie was a huge flashpoint in the furry community, not only in the States but across the world. It's a movie and it's not even people who automatically identify as furries. I was talking to my wife earlier today, saying, "Oh, I'm doing a podcast on Robin," and she said, "I haven't seen that in a long time." And then she paused and she said, "When I was a kid, I thought Robin Hood was foxy." I was like, that's what I hear. Lots of people felt that way. So I know this.
Bring that up.
Yeah, I know it. Go for it, Alan. Go ahead.
Oh, no. You brought up exactly what I was going to, but watching it again, I was really struck by how kinky the movie is. It's one of those interesting things where it's not like other Disney films of the era did this kind of thing. So it's fascinating to know how much of this was the inspiration of younger animators, because I'm sure, if you guys didn't notice it, I'm sure other listeners know Don Bluth is one of the animators credited here. There's Dale Baer, who worked on a lot of Disney Renaissance era. So they're the beginning of the next generation of Disney animators and other animators was represented here. So I wonder how much of that might be there as well. But anyway, so let's dig into it track by track. As I said, the first two songs in this movie, they are technically separate songs, but they come almost, like one after the other to almost make you think, if you don't know the movie very well yet, oh, maybe this is like a sung through film, which is not at all the case. The first one is Whistle Stop, written and performed, as mentioned, by the country singer Roger Miller. And it's an interesting song, not just because it sets the tone for laid back, relaxed. It also plays over the opening credits, which also identify the different voice actors from all the different people I've already mentioned. And it says Prince John, a lion, voiced by Peter Ustinov. There's a sense of, I can't tell how much of this is me just being nice and saying there's a little bit of like deadpan humor of showing you the character and saying, oh yes, this is a fox. In case you couldn't tell that Robin Hood was a fox, it's a fox. And then you see all the different credits and the characters running back and forth, the types of things that we actually see them doing after the opening credits are over. But and I should also note, this is a song in some sense of the word, but in the sense of having, lyrics, not so much. That said, I like it. It's a fun, a good little beat. It's not maybe the greatest Disney song of all time, but it is enjoyable. What do the two of you think? Scott, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, the thing about this whole thing, and this is sort of where I'm going to sort of set the table for what's weird but interesting about this, is that, as we've already noted, 3 of the songs are written by Roger Miller, and they have a sort of a consistent vibe to them, but 2 of them are not, and they feel very different. It feels like it's this weird pastiche of styles, which, again, is interesting, but it doesn't give it kind of a cohesiveness. And so that this does set a certain tone, which Yeah, could Roger Miller have written the Love Ballad? I don't know. I would have at least liked to hear him try, but it does. I do like the tone that it sets. And Josh, if you thought it was a little odd comparing it to Dazed and Confused, I'm going to get Shakespearean here. When the whole comparison of the characters, so-and-so, a lion, it just sort of reminds me of the way if you look in the title page of a Shakespearean play, it would be so-and-so, a duke. And it would be like, it was sort of here's the Shakespearean, or in, the Blackadder series, Baldric, a dog's body. It's like,
Good reference.
Go ahead.
Alan, what do you think?
I think it's a great way to introduce the movie, because it does kind of create this relaxed atmosphere, but also a very inviting atmosphere. It's lessons. It's the feel is not so much this big kind of Broadway style musical that became so popular in the Ashman years, as it is like, it's like, come sit around the fire and let me tell you this yarn. And I like that because it really works on kids, because obviously it had an effect on me, but it's also just kind of inviting in a way. And I like the lack of, I don't want to say the lack of professionalism in the song itself. It's more just the kind of it's not polished, but it kind of has that in a way that sounds authentic to me, and I really enjoy that quality.
I can see that. I'm looking at his Wikipedia page where they describe how his whimsical lyrics and nonsense-sounding style led him to writing songs like Whistle Stop. And I think, yeah, the little nonsense of it, because the other part that I think is funny about, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned this to Alan before we began recording, that we do discussions on covers later in the show, and we will do that today as well. I will say not all of these songs are very easy to find covers for, because, as Scott may have found, and I learned earlier today, there's a completely different song called Whistle Stop that sounds nothing like this at all. So as soon as I listen to it, it's like, wow, I think there's a version by Louis Prima. And like, wow, that's really cool. And it's clearly not what I'm looking for. And the same is true for the song Love, because, love is a pretty generic word that appears in, I don't know, almost every song ever written. Again, it's a fun little number, and I think it's interesting because I can't off the top of my head think, there's not a ton of other Disney animated films that begin with let me show you the character so you know who's going to be performing as that character. It's not new to have a lot of the opening credits instead of having end credits. That was certainly the standard at the time, but the showing the cast, as it were, it was an interesting approach.
The Lion King does that, but in a completely different way, obviously.
Yes, there's no names associated in Circle of Life, to be fair. Yeah. And also it has words.
Simba, a lion.
Yeah, in case you couldn't
another
tell.
Lion.
Right.
Another lion.
Oh boy. But so after Whistle Stop, there's again a very brief bit of dialogue. I already mentioned part of it, the tell it how it is or was or whatever. And then Roger Miller, as Alan Adale, immediately moves into the second song, Oodle Alley, which is this, again, brief. It's about a minute or so long. It sounds a little bit like, I don't know if this makes sense to anybody listening. There used to be this little nursery rhyme style song when I was a kid, like about little bunny Foo-Foo hopping through the forest, and it's got a very similar sound to Oodle Alley, if you know that song. And it's fun, it's quick, it doesn't overstay its welcome. That's the one thing about all the Roger Miller songs, and really all of these songs. None of them are too long. None of them really drag on too long. And Oodle Alley is mostly just meant to establish, Robin Hood and Little John, they hang out, they steal from the rich, they give to the poor. The sheriff of Nottingham is chasing after him. He can't catch him. Oh, drat. And that kind of sets the stage for the entire story. I think it's, again, I like Whistle Stop. This one I think is really, really solid. And to the point that Scott was making earlier, it does make me kind of wish, what would Roger Miller's other songs, like romantic ballad, would have sounded like? I know about a decade after this, he wrote the songs for the Broadway show Big River. I am admittedly not familiar with Big River outside of knowing what it is, and it's a riff on Mark Twain, but I don't know if that show has any more ballad-like songs. But this at least is a same kind of tone, same kind of musical quality, but not quite the same as Whistle Stop. And again, fun, clever, enjoyable, and quick. What do the two of you think?
Yeah, I mean, I had a weird comparison in mind, which was the Ballad of Sir Robin from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is we have the first verse where it's here is, Robin Hood and Little John walking through the forest, and by the end of it, they're running through the forest. Their brave Sir Robin ran away, and it's like yes, it's Robin running away. But it's it has that telling the story quality that I think you don't often get in a lot. I mean, there was a brief period where it felt like the sort of story advancing songs. Now, this isn't necessarily advancing the story, but you're basically getting lyrics that are telling you exactly what is happening as you are watching it happen on screen. It's not anything more complicated than that. And I think the fact that it was done in sort of a, I don't know, lyrically clever way, it's fun. And again, this is the style that I thought maybe the whole thing could have and should have been. As much as I do like the Phony King of England, which we'll get to, I just think that this is, I like the style.
I also like the style as well. I think it's really interesting because the lyrics are narration of what happens, and it made me kind of curious. It made me curious about the sort of chicken egg quality of like, what did he write these lyrics first, and then the animators kind of were inspired by that, or was it vice versa? And one thing that I also think is really interesting is that like the closest thing this has to a chorus is oodalali, oodalali, golly, what a day. And that's sort of a phrase that just kind of runs through the movie. Like characters sort of say it as a nonsense phrase to themselves. And it's also almost becomes this kind of shibboleth that like everybody's on the right side of, this economic catastrophe. And I like that it kind of creates its own folklore within the universe of the movie that I think adds to its power in a way that like it becomes a phrase that sort of means something but never really defined.
I did note that this time as I was watching, like, wait, they're saying oodalally. How do they know oodalally? Does he just, I mean, obviously the Alan Adele character is part of the story. He's not, he's not completely a narrator. He is part of the animal kingdom of Robin Hood. So it is interesting, though, that is kind of a running thread a little bit. Now, if you haven't seen this movie in a long time, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time here describing the plot, although I could, because as I mentioned earlier, there's like a 45 to 50 minute stretch before we get another song in this movie. It is, this is obviously a far period before the Disney Renaissance when it felt like, as mentioned already, the Ashman Menken style of Broadway style storytelling. This is not that. The basic notion is very much the same as what anybody who has any, you don't even have to know Robin Hood back and like front to back to kind of know the basic outline of the story. As mentioned, he robs from the rich, gives to the poor. He's driving the cowardly but obnoxious Prince John crazy. Prince John here with his snake frenemy, we'll say, Sir Hiss, voiced by... Go ahead.
Oh, one thing that now that we mentioned it, one thing that I thought was strange was that, or interesting, is that in the introduction where you learn about Prince John, it's not just that King Richard went on a crusade. He was hypnotized into going on a crusade, which I thought was kind of an interesting, kind of weird joke to make about religion and holy war that I did not expect in a movie with like cute snakes and lions and stuff.
I do wonder if we're giving them more credit than they deserve for going deep on the religious commentary, but you make a good point. That said, so Robin Hood is redistributing wealth, as we know. There are a lot of different bunny children here that kind of draw us in as we all meet Maid Marian, her lady-in-waiting, played by Carol Shelley, Lady Cluck. Maid Marian and Robin Hood had this romance. Do they each remember each other? Of course they do. They're still madly in love. There is, talking about lengthy, there's a big sequence in which Robin Hood and Little John go undercover to win an archery tournament because the grand prize is a kiss from Maid Marian. They are disguised, they get caught, but they still manage to escape. Robin Hood and Maid Marian finally share that romantic evening together, and that leads us to the third of 5 songs here, the aforementioned Love, which is written by George Bruns, wrote the music, and Floyd Huddleston wrote the lyrics. It's performed by Nancy Adams, who is not one of the actors or actresses in this film, but she sings it. And again, I mentioned it earlier, it's possible that you out there, you might know the song because it appears in, speaking of animated films about foxes, Fantastic Mr. Fox, the stop-motion animated film from Wes Anderson. I believe also, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the Ballad of Davy Crockett briefly in Fantastic Mr. Fox?
Yes.
He loved him some 50s to 70s era Disney, did Wes Anderson.
Well, I mean, I just always thought it was a great joke that he had that he used the thing love song between two foxes in that movie. I just thought
yes.
if you didn't know where it was, it's like it's the if you know kind of thing.
Exactly. And so the song here is very nice, very it's meant to be this dusky night in Nottingham Forest, and I don't know if it's automatically kinky per se, but in the same way that, as I mentioned earlier, if you watch Can You Feel the Love Tonight, the musical sequence of Can You Feel the Love Tonight in the 1994 animated version of Lion King, when I was a little boy who wanted to be a big boy, when I saw that in theaters, did I really understand that the subtext of that scene is, oh, they're about to have sex? Because that's basically what you're seeing. Go back and rewatch The Lion King. There's a few shots of the two of them, of Simba and Nala, not just frolicking around in the meadow, but they're like looking at each other. And again, as a kid, I don't get what those looks are meant to communicate. As an adult, it's like, okay then. Well, I'll give you some privacy. Is that what you're looking for? And that's kind of what happens here. In a little, like, there's clothing here, unlike in The Lion King for those characters, but there's a very obvious sense of, boy, they sure have not forgotten each other at all, and they are very happy to reacquaint themselves with the other. I do think, my glibness aside, I do think it's a nice, again, brief song. None of these songs, I think probably the longest is Phony King of England, and even that might only be like 3.5 minutes long. These are all very succinct songs. And again, I do kind of wish we'd heard Roger Miller's version of this, but I enjoy the song even as that stands. What do the two of you think?
I think, well, like you said, it's 90 seconds. It's like maybe 90 seconds, right? Mm-hmm. It's not long, but it creates a mood and it creates an impression. And I think it's a very pretty song. I don't think it's especially memorable, but I actually think that serves the imagery rather well. And you alluded to that part in Can You Feel the Love Tonight, where Nala and Simba are looking at each other, and if you're an adult, you know exactly what that means. But what's interesting about Robin Hood is that they're not looking at each other; they're looking right at you. Like, mm-hmm. There's these two shots of Maid Marian and Robin looking right at the audience, and I don't want to say it's necessary. It's not. For some people, it's sexual, no kink shame, but it's definitely romantically charged. And but even if you don't have that kind of emotional response to it, it is kind of powerful because the detail of their faces and how their eyes look, and it's so open and expressive, just really creates an impression. And I feel that the song, while it's very pretty and not very memorable, it creates a space for the audience to kind of react to the characters that way.
Yeah. I mean, you have to keep in mind again the context in which I became most familiar with this, which is just listening to it on the record. And here's this love ballad that grade school me was like, when can we get past this part? When we can get past the smoochy part and get onto the fun song? And so there's that component to it. It's a pretty tune, but it really just slows things down, which is, this is not like it was the fastest paced movie in general, but at least there's other stuff going on generally. I also should note, this is kind of a little bit of a detour, but I was very surprised yesterday at my screening of Fantastic Four to suddenly have George Bruns music placed. As I noted on Blue Sky, that there's a needle drop of some Disney Parks George Bruns music there, and so I've been there he is again. It's quite a
like the incidental music that you would hear in the parks themselves, or
yes. So have you seen Fantastic Four yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay, there is a montage that is basically, I mean, given the era in which the film is set. That's sort of like peppy. Da, 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 da. Yes. So it's that is the music that is played from the People Mover, now no longer at Disneyland proper, but yes. It's the little. This song itself in the movie is just sort of the pause that refreshes and then we just move on to something a little bit more exciting.
Look at that. You gave me one reason to be excited for it. Please, Scott, The Fantastic Four First Steps. That's the full title of the movie.
The Fantastic numeral 4. Please be sure to use your numeral 4 when you are using it. I've also not yet seen that film, but the mid-century aesthetic has been very obvious from all the marketing. So I would agree. The People Mover song makes perfect sense. And yes, for those of you out there who know George Bruns, I would argue underrated. I would say, relatively speaking. So Love but you
is.
haven't mentioned this is the Oscar song, which is the weird part of this too. It
is. Now, it's funny. We can quickly dive into that now. So there's a few fun facts about this was the single Oscar nomination that Robin Hood got was for this song. Now, before I ask the two of you to guess what song beat out the Love, and hopefully that phrasing isn't too troublesome. So my favorite detail, the two people who performed the song at the 46th Academy Awards, which, if you're curious, is the same Academy Awards ceremony with the famous streaking event that David Niven commented on so famously. It's two young actors who had been in at least one Disney film together and were also in a different musical in 1973. They are Johnny Whitaker and a very young Jodie Foster, who had not only co-starred in the Disney film Napoleon and Samantha with Michael Douglas. Yes, that Michael Douglas. They also starred in the musical Tom Sawyer. Speaking of Mark Twain, that came out the same year with songs by the Sherman Brothers, and obviously was not quite as big of a hit as the studio may have wanted to. But yes, they performed the duet on stage. Now, it's funny. I knew immediately, just thinking about the year, which song must have won. Do either of you know off the top of your head what song won the Oscar in 1970?
Absolutely. And this is probably largely because a couple of years ago when I was doing a brief 50-year history of some 1973 films, and
sure.
one of the first ones I looked at, because it was one of the most popular films of that year, was The Way We Were.
Mm-hmm. That is a good point. Now, Alan, he just answered. Would you have known off the top of your head that it was The Way We Were?
No way.
Here's the fun fact, by the way. Marvin Hamlet. Go ahead.
I'd say there's only one other of the nominated songs I would have immediately known, because I know when all the James Bond movies were released,
yes.
And that would have been Live and Let Die.
Correct.
In that year. But I don't know what the other two nominees would have been.
Well, before I tell you what they were, I do think it's funny to note, I'm just looking right now, Marvin Hamlisch, who of course wrote the music to The Way We Were, he won the Oscar. He shared the Oscar for Best Song. He also won the Best Original Dramatic Score for The Way We Were. And he also won Best Music Scoring for The Sting. He had a busy year. The other two nominees for Best Original Song were All That Love Went to Waste from A Touch of Class, a film starring George Segal and Glenda Jackson, and You're So Nice to Be Around from Cinderella Liberty. Music by John Williams. Yes, that John Williams. Lyrics by Paul Williams, who, of course, wrote the songs for the Muppet Movie, the Phantom of the Paradise, lots of other credits. But yes, so Love was the only Academy Award nominee. Nothing else for Roger. No nominations at all for Roger Miller, sadly. And I should also note, I wish that George Bruns had received an Oscar prior to Robin Hood. It was his fourth and final nomination. He was nominated for Best Score for Sleeping Beauty and Babes in Toyland, as well as the Best Score Adaptation or Treatment for The Sword in the Stone. He deserved an Oscar. He was an excellent, if underrated, composer, I think. But that said, by the way, in case anybody's curious, I just want to point out, I'm sure nobody else listening, or even the two of you guys, I forget, Scott, did you and I talk about Napoleon and Samantha on the old show? I feel like
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we did.
So I don't know if you remember, I after that episode, I made a GIF of one of the most ridiculous moments in that movie that features Michael Douglas, like, hip hip hurraying in the middle of a meadow, and it's a young Michael Douglas. This is pre him producing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Michael Douglas, and it's just the silliest thing ever. Not a great movie, but it's worth watching just to kind of see how young they all look. Anyway, so after Love, as I mentioned earlier, the other two songs in this kind of come into play almost instantly, because right after we have Love, we transition into the phony King of England, because all of the residents of Nottingham, all of the poorer residents are kind of banding together. They're hanging out. They're having a big hootenanny. And so this song, written by Johnny Mercer, performed primarily by Phil Harris. Now, before I get into my xerography lecture, which I promise won't be very long, I should note, Johnny Mercer, even though he is not Roger Miller, Johnny Mercer had a hell of a career prior to the phony King of England. This is a guy who won 4 Academy Awards, including for songs like On the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, Accentuate the Positive, That Old Black Magic. He wrote I think he wrote Hooray for Hollywood. We're talking about this is truly one of the great Hollywood songwriters of all time. And the song itself is fine. It's not great. It's fine. It's not even the best song he wrote in 1973. I don't know if I could put either of you on the spot to name that song. It was not nominated for an Oscar, but it is the name of a film I know is a big favorite among what used to be called film Twitter.
No. I have no idea.
The film and song are both called The Long Goodbye.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So there you go. I knew if I mentioned it, be like, oh, well, we like that. It's a good movie. Anyway, so the song is fine. Here's where the xerography thing comes in. So the concept of xerography was pioneered by Ub Iwerks, who Disney animation fans know had been a longtime stalwart with Walt Disney. They had created characters like Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and Mickey Mouse together. He had been there from the very beginning. By the 1960s, he was obviously a little older, naturally, but he was still trying to work on pioneering animation techniques. And the thing about xerography that was so useful for a film I mentioned earlier, 101 Dalmatians, was that it enabled the animators to animate 101 Dalmatians without their hands falling off. Thinking about the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie episode reference all over again. I forget the exact exchange of, do the animators do the show live? Oh, it'd be a terrible strain on their wrists. So in the same way, it'd be a terrible strain on the animators' wrists to animate the distinctive spots of 101 animals. Now, in case anybody out there, or even Alan, hears the word xerography and thinks that sounds a little bit like Xerox. Well, that's on purpose, because the basic idea is it allowed the animators to copy over different characters or movements and essentially cut some of the time down as they were producing films. Also, I should note, in an era when Disney budgets were not, overflowing. These were lower budget films. I think we can tell just generally from watching Robin Hood that this was not a film made at high expense. And that's fine. Again, it was very useful for 101 Dalmatians. Disney animators continued using it. And if you watch The Phony King of England right after, say, you've watched The Jungle Book or The Aristocats or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you might say, something about this sequence just looks really familiar to me. And that's because they copied over the movements of some of the characters and some of the musical sequences in those films here. So the bunny who is drumming, whose eyes look really squinty, well, that's because that is the copy over of a really insulting Asian stereotype of a Siamese cat in the Everybody Wants to Be a Cat sequence from the Aristocats. Watching Lady Cluck and Little John dance together, you might watch that and say, boy, that looks a little bit like Baloo and King Louie. I want to be like you from the Jungle Book. That's because it is. It's the same character movements. There's YouTube videos about this. I won't go into any further. My point in mentioning all of this is that listening to the song by itself, song's fine. Watching it in context of this film as a whole sequence, I get really bothered by it, because to me it's just, this is the perfect example of how lazy I think this film is, because you're literally copying over other animated characters. And I realize that may not matter for either of you and for many listeners, and that's fine. Again, I can listen to the song and say, yeah, this song's okay. It doesn't feel like it's remotely as good as anything Phil Harris performs in The Jungle Book. Again, just listening to the songs by themselves. But for me, with this, it's just this one sequence that really has that xerographic feel to the point of just seeming like, why even pay attention? You guys are, again, cutting corners, trying to save time, trying to save budget. I get why they did it, but that does not make it dramatically interesting to me. I'm off my high horse. What do the two of you think about this sequence?
Well, I think I don't think it's a great song like you, Josh, but I think it's an interesting song because it is overtly political in a way, in a movie that isn't. I mean, actually, it's a very political movie. I mean, at one point, the bunny, the male bunny of the bunny children, starts screaming "Death to tyrants," and I think it's interesting to just have a movie just be so overt, and it sort of adds to the world of this movie where it sort of becomes an earworm in the world of the movie. So in a couple scenes later, I don't remember if it's the next scene or a little bit later, that the sheriff of Nottingham is like humming the Phony King of England to himself just because he likes it. And I think that's a really good way of kind of, again, creating the world of this movie, but then also characterizing the sheriff as him being more like less overtly evil and being, for lack of a better term, a good German. And so I like the way that it kind of uses song to kind of create this political world and then comment on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of becomes like the Marseillaise of this this world. It exists within the universe as kind of the rebel song, and it's that I do think that that's interesting. And I love this song just because I think that the order in which you experience things certainly makes a difference. As I said, I have the Aristocats and and this movie on LP. So I knew Phil Harris from those two movies before I ever watched or knew anything about The Jungle Book. And so this Phil Harris he just had that insouciance, that cool that I thought was so, and this was just sort of a great distillation of all that. He was the rebel, he was the the bad boy, and he could be the one who could talk truth to power. And not that I knew that terminology at 7 or whatever it was, but I just think that it was, again, I know that sequence. I can see those two sequences, the ones you mentioned of the Lady Cluck and Little John versus Baloo and King Louis. And of course now I see it's like, yeah, that's kind of a bummer. But in my head, I see the Robin Hood. That whole sequence is just the part that I enjoy most in this movie, because it was just a fun song with some fun animation, and so it's the part that sticks with me perhaps more than any other individual part of this movie.
And those are fair points. I am curious, what was it like the first time you saw The Jungle Book? Did your head just blow open entirely? Because to me, what you're describing in terms of his insouciance and his laid back and his cool, that was me watching The Jungle Book the first time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, I probably would have seen it at one of the times it was re-released theatrically, which would have been sometime in the mid 80s. So I would have already been a teenager. And so not necessarily thinking in those terms like, oh yeah, I knew. And I may have already known that this was the same voice, and he sort of, kind of became a house character for playing the cool cat, in whatever movie he was in.
Right.
But it's, I just don't think honestly, I don't remember the first time that I was aware of or just made that connection I probably made the connection between the Mowgli and Christopher Robin in Winnie the Pooh before I ever did those things.
Sure. That's fair. I think the one thing that, especially as we shift to the final song here, that I know we kind of talked about a little bit, the different sensibilities of the different songwriters, because as I said, love the Phony King of England and our final song, Not in Nottingham. Again, there's a little bit of dialogue between each of these songs, a couple minutes here and there at most, but these three songs appear in about a 10 to 12 minute stretch of the film, which means you're hearing three totally different styles of song from three distinctive sets of songs. I say sets of songwriters because Love was written by two people, not one. Roger Miller wrote and sings not Nottingham, which again is definitely a sharp shift in tones, because after the joy of the phony King of England, after death to tyrants and, screw the man, that kind of thing, well, Prince John is so mad that he starts arresting everybody who isn't paying their taxes, which means he starts arresting everybody. So Not Nottingham is a song performed as all the characters are at a very low point. They're all feeling very sad. So the song is lower key, slower moving. One, me, might say dirge-esque somewhat. It's not quite. Again, it's a okay song. I think going into this, I disliked it more. I'm more okay with it now. I think part of what is just jarring is how quickly it goes from, yay, the phony King of England, to not in Nottingham. It's like, whoa, okay. Again, it's a good, quick song, definitely much different tonally from anything else that's come before, though. What do the two of you think?
I would love to dive into this because I love this song, and it's one that I really wish had another verse, because I think it plays an interesting role structurally, because you don't often see in musicals or otherwise, we all know about the good times montage. There's, the second act structure of a lot of movies. It's just like there's the point at which we have like everything's going great, and it's the winning streak in the sports movie. It's the, living high on the hog when, the gangsters are all doing it. But this is a bad times montage, and you don't have those very often. And it's an interesting thing to have to write a song for a bad times montage. And I think it is just a beautiful song. Again, it is etched into my memory. I know if, one of those prompts you have, you have to sing a song for your life. I could sing this song for my life.
All right then.
But I think it's a really wonderful plaintive melody. And again, it's weird perhaps because of how jarring the shift is, but since this is about the songs themselves, I love this song, and I just think it's the only thing that I don't like is I wish it were longer. I wish there were another verse to, can kind of continue this sensibility.
Well, one thing that I think is very interesting about the song, and like to your point, Scott, about how it continues or doesn't, is at first it's being performed by Roger Miller, but then the melody shifts from him playing it with a guitar or something to the melody in the church organ. And then it's the same tune. And I like that. That's kind of an interesting way to shift the perspective from an omniscient point of view to a specific point of view of like, here's our segue into the next scene. And I think it's, again, an interesting way of kind of putting you in, making all the characters share a point of view. But as for the song itself, it's hard for me I think it's a pretty melody and and it's a little bit of an earworm, but because for me, I didn't have the LP growing up, so I was really watching it much more, so that I make a closer connection to the visuals of it. I think it's a kind of a maudlin song, just because of all the cute little things of like of all the poor little animals and how like tragic they are. It just kind of it kind of sags the song a little bit.
And that's true. That's an absolutely fair point, because it definitely plays differently with the visual than it does without it.
Yeah.
And again, it basically marks the end of the songs in the film. After this, there is Sir Hiss tries to placate the still very angry Prince John, who decides he's going to not only arrest Friar Tuck, but he's going to order him to be executed, primarily to trap Robin Hood, who he assumes correctly will attempt to save Friar Tuck. There is a big action sequence. There's a fire. There's a castle on fire. I will note, speaking of George Bruns and speaking of Sleeping Beauty, in the bit near the end where Robin Hood has to climb to the top of the tower within the castle, the fire is approaching. There's these frantic, very like slicing violin sounds in a way. And all I was thinking was, is that literally the same musical cue from the end of Sleeping Beauty with Prince Philip? Because it sounds really similar.
There are also some musical flourishes. I should have written it down, but there are a few musical flourishes that happen throughout Robin Hood that are definitely lifted from Sword in the Stone. So I don't think that's something that yeah.
And again, not automatically surprising it. George Bruns, I think, is a great composer, so I'm not saying I'm against hearing it, but I was like, oh, I don't think I'd realized there was such similarity there. But anyway, go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to say one thing, like, that kind of speaks to, I think, your point about how tonally the different music is. And I realize it's not a song, but the score to the movie is kind of interesting because there's that whole escape sequence after the archery contest where it's kind of like it's kind of like a funky song almost. There's like a guitar solo in it. And and so to me, it's like this is like sort of a kitchen sink approach to like songs and movies because it's so many different genres and so many different styles that, something's going to resonate with somebody.
Pretty much. Yeah. So after the big action sequence, of course, there is there's the classic, almost quintessential Disney death, fake out where it looks like Robin Hood's dead. Of course he's not. He's fine. And King Richard returns from the Crusades and now having been deprogrammed from his hypnosis. Obviously, things go back to the way they were, not the way we were. And Prince John, Sir Hiss, the Sheriff of Nottingham, as I think Alan was alluding earlier, nobody actually dies in this movie. We have characters getting imprisoned for their many crimes, but and to me, that's one of the things that makes the final battle between the sheriff and Robin Hood maybe a little less with teeth, because I was like, well, but nobody's actually going to die here. There's only so much of a high stakes situation. I think it's also a case where we haven't really talked too much about the majority of the cast here, because as I alluded earlier, almost none of them sing outside of Phil Harris and Roger Miller. But I have to imagine that casting Pat Buttram as the Sheriff of Nottingham was almost a deliberate, but he doesn't sound like a wolf kind of choice. Like, let's go for somebody who doesn't maybe immediately evince terror the way that when they cast George Sanders as Shere Khan, as the tiger in the Jungle Book, his voice fits that character. Pat Buttram's almost deliberately doesn't, which is fine, but also makes the big fight scene at the end like, well, here I have Brian Bedford, who I know primarily from an episode of Frasier. He's in one episode of Frasier, and by the way, Carol Shelley, who played Lady Cluck, is in another episode of Frasier. If you know the episode of Frasier where he has to pretend to be Jewish to impress his girlfriend's mother, the mother is Carol Shelley. It is arguably one of the best episodes of Frasier. In case anybody's curious to see what she looked like in real life, I know she and Monica Evans, I should note, had also originated roles in The Odd Couple on Broadway. They're in the film version. They're also, I believe they were on the TV show version of The Odd Couple as well. I will note, by the way, Monica Evans, this is her final film role. She retired after this movie. She voices Maid Marian, and that was it for her. Andy Devine plays Friar Tuck. You know his voice even if you don't know his face. Peter Ustinov is Prince John. It's a weird mix of like some British actors like Peter Ustinov, like Terry Thomas, and then what feels like one thing Disney did a lot in their 60s and 70s films, both animated and live action, even though CBS went through what was called the Rural Purge, where they canceled high-rated shows like Green Acres and Petticoat Junction, and obviously we all know CBS would never cancel high-rated shows these days. I figured a way to tie in current events. Look at me. A lot of the actors from those shows end up in movies like this. Pat Buttram was on Green Acres. Like George Lindsay was he on the Andy Griffith Show or something? He was in yeah. So I mean, he was on maybe RFD as well. A lot of actors who are from that CBS Rural Purge, like down south era, and obviously it fits this because there is kind of a deep south flair to this, even though it's set in England, obviously. So I just wanted to acknowledge the cast, even though again you really don't hear any of them singing in this film. Before we get into covers, anything else the two of you wanted to discuss regarding these songs?
No, I mean, I think that again, the weird pastiche of styles is probably the main thing that stands out from distance. You know, it's these songs are so part of my just wired into my brain at this point that I
Right.
don't often think of them in a way other than there's that thing I listened to so many times, and now it's like these things. One of these things is not like the other.
Yes, and so there are covers. There is a few of them, and Scott, obviously, I'll turn to you in a minute here to share some of your discoveries. What I want to point out is Oodle Alley has a number of covers. The one that I found most fascinating is by a guy named Ben Dickey, and it's not because of him, but it's because it features, of all people, Alia Shawkat. Maybe from Arrested Development is like the backing vocal in this version, which, by the way, sounds exactly like the one in the movie. It's a minute long. It's very short. It's like, and Alia Shawkat's in there. Good for her, I guess. Los Lobos did a version of that song as well. I know they did that big album of Disney covers. They also did a version of Not in Nottingham, which I liked. The Los Lobos Oodle Alley is a little slower than the original song, but mostly similar. I have to admit, Scott, I didn't find a whole lot of others that were either drastically different or unique or like memorable. What about you? Anything of note?
I mean, you mentioned the main things. I think what's notable about this, and as we've kind of concluded for obvious reasons, these songs were not as culturally sticky as a lot of other Disney songs, even of similar, certainly not the bare necessities or, there's lots of things that sort of have become much more well known within the general population, even not just the Disney fans. But, the Los Lobos ones are the primary ones that were actually recordings rather than we've come across many of these things now as we've been doing this with people who just decide they're going to do their YouTube version of whatever there are. And there are plenty of those. There are plenty of those, but nothing that really, I mean, now I'm not going to, see my notes are not complete. There was sort of a Hawaiian version of Not in Nottingham that was sort of kind of reminded me of the Brother Is version of Over the Rainbow.
Okay. Sure.
That's sort of that vibe to it. And I'll see if I can find the name of the artist, but now it's completely lost to me. But that's one of the few things like, oh, that's at least different. But most of them are just, this is not a movie that had that, like, I got to do a cover version of, Not in Nottingham. There's just not a lot of those going around.
Right. And I think that's, again, it kind of speaks to this again. This film has a cult legacy. It has a passionate fan base, but it's never quite broken through in quite the same way as other films that we've discussed have. I should note, though, now, I think this was most recently reported a few years ago, so I'm guessing it won't happen. I'm hoping it won't happen. But apparently back in the early days of the pandemic, Disney threatened / touted that they were developing a remake of Robin Hood. Don't worry, it was going to be anthropomorphic characters, so it would be a live action / CG hybrid, aka an animated film. And it would have been directed by one of the directors of Raya and the Last Dragon, set to be released exclusively on Disney Plus, because Disney would have understood it was not. I don't think that this would have been quite as big a hit if it was released in theaters. But so I think that's it for Robin Hood. Unless, Alan, you had anything else you wanted to weigh in? I want to make sure I give you the last word if you have any other thoughts.
No, I have nothing to add. This was a really good discussion.
All right. Well, in that case, Scott, why don't you take us out?
So with that, it's time to turn down the volume on Mousterpiece Melodies. What's on the playlist for our next episode? Tangled. And while you wait, make sure you subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. Alan Zilberman, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we mentioned your credits at the top of the show, but as a reminder, can you please let listeners know where they can find you and your work on the internet?
Great. Yeah. You can find me on Blue Sky at Alan Zilberman, AlanZilberman, and you can find my work in the Washington City Paper and Spectrum Culture.
Great. And of course, we'd love for all of you to listen along with us and tell us what you think. Do you love the songs of Robin Hood? Do you hate them? Even I don't like this movie, I like the songs of this movie. Maybe you're out there and you really can't stand them. Maybe you're curious to know for our next episode which of the actors from Tangled I have met in person. Spoiler alert, it's the person I'm most embarrassed to have met. Think about the people in that movie and who you'd be embarrassed to have met now. That's the person I met. We'll talk about that next time, Scott. I hope you're excited.
Oh, yeah. And I could tell you about the person I met, and it's not the same person.
I have a feeling, considering I know a specific panel you once hosted, I think I know who we're talking about. And yes, I wish I had met that person instead. If you have any comments, questions, or opinions you'd like to share, you can always reach me at mousterpiececinema@gmail.com and follow me on Blue Sky at Mousterpiece. Scott, where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me at Scott Renshaw on Blue Sky. You can find me the same Scott Renshaw on Letterboxd, where sometimes I will do non-current releases as I'm watching some of these older movies like the one we just talked about. You can also find my current reviews of Salt Lake City Weekly at cityweekly.net. And I'm Scott Renshaw.
And I'm Josh Spiegel, and we'll see you all next time on Mousterpiece Melodies.